Okay, welcome to the workshop for the Wyoming Water Development Commission. First off, we're going to do roll call. Clinton.
Okay. This thing over here. Nick Bettis. Not here. Karen Bud Fallon. She's not here. David Evans.
Here.
Gerald Geis.
Here.
Kellen Lancaster.
Here.
Sheridan Little.
Here.
Jeanette Seekin.
Here.
Larry Suker.
Here.
Rodney Wagner.
Here.
So we have two that are not here. So we have a quorum though, right?
Yeah, we have.
Yep, we have a quorum.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, next item would be audience introductions. We'll start down here with Kellen.
Kellen Lancaster, Water Development, District 4 on the west side of the state.
David Evans, District 1, Southeast Wyoming.
Rod Wagner, Wyoming Water Development, District 1.
Larry Suker, Water Development Commissioner, District 2.
Gerald Geis, District 3, Bighorn Basin and Fremont County.
Sheridan Little, Wyoming Water Development Commission, Water Division 2.
Clinton Glick, Wyoming Water Development Commission, Wind River. Also have a brand new grandbaby, Tesla. I just wanted to tell everybody.
Jeanette Seekin, Division 3, Cody.
Daniel Solish, Attorney General's Office.
Katie Talbot, Water Development Office.
Barry Labonte, Director, Water Development Office.
Jody Green, Water Development Office.
Barry Lawrence, Water Development Office.
Brian Clark, Water Development Office.
Julie Gonzar, Project Manager here at the Water Development Office.
Jody Pavlika, Water Development Office.
Chris Nicholson, Water Resources Data System.
All day, Wyoming Game and Fish.
Brad Brooks, Director, City of Cheyenne Board of Public Utilities. David Cole, Construction Project Coordinator, City of Cheyenne Board of Public Utilities.
Okay, thank you and welcome to the meeting. Next on the agenda is legislative update. Harry.
So, Mr. Chairman, it was certainly a busy session, and I guess like last year, there were 8 or 9 bills that affected water development that were making their way through the process. And then, as I'll share some details with you here in a minute, the construction bill ran into some trouble in that amendments started flying, and one project was deleted, and it ended up in a conference committee that was still not settled last Friday, and the legislature was tentatively going to adjourn on Saturday. And as I understand it, that conference committee and the ultimate approval by the bodies of the bill didn't happen until Saturday. So that's leaving it to the very last minute, which certainly puts all of the projects in the bill at risk. But nevertheless, let me get started, and I'll handle the 3 easy ones, and that is 3 of these bills failed. The first one was House Bill 65. That is what I call design build, and Select Water brought that forward, and it was revising some language dealing with design build projects. And ultimately, that bill was not considered by committee of the whole in the House. And so I don't have a lot of details, but they never brought it up for discussion. So by virtue of if these bills don't keep up with the calendar, then they just automatically fail. So committee of the whole did not consider that bill. The second bill that failed was Senate File 55, which was the Water Development Account 3 revisions, which was changing the size limitations for projects that could be considered by Water Development Account 3. And that one died in House Ag, did not make it out of there. And I was not at that meeting where Water Development Account 3, was that, were you there for that one? Okay. Was there any discussion as to, sorry.
That's fine.
Mr. Chairman, there was a little bit of discussion about the thought on account 3 that reducing the cap or reducing the threshold from 2,000 acre feet down to 50, then you would have a bunch of other sponsors coming in, and it would be a kind of dribble and drab, kind of a run on account 3. That you'd be, rather than just larger projects, you'd have these smaller ones coming in that would be competing with that, and it would just kind of take that account down. And that was the discussion.
I thought it was going to be lowered to 1,000 instead of 50.
So, Mr. Chairman, the way the bill was written is that there's 2 current size limitations. For new reservoirs, account 3 funding is to be used for reservoirs of 2,000 acre feet or larger. And for enlargements, it's 1,000 acre feet or larger. That's the current thresholds. This bill brought both of those thresholds down to 50 acre feet in size.
Right. Okay.
So then, Mr. Chairman, the third bill that failed was Senate File 64, and this was a bill, in fact, I don't know that it was a committee bill. I'd have to look and see who the sponsors were, but this was a bill intended to restore the funding to Water Development Account 1 that was taken out of the last year's supplemental budget and diverted to the Board of Control in the state engineer's office. So its value is about $6.2 million of funds that flowed out of account 1 to Board of Control, and it's funding their operations as we speak, and it will fund their operations through the end of this fiscal year. So the bill did a couple of things. One, it provided alternative funding, and it started out as general fund, and then they were using the rainy day account funds. It was amended along the way to, in essence, pay for the operations of Board of Control for the rest of this fiscal year, and then to repay Water Development for costs that have been incurred out of that. So it would have resulted in that $6.2 million appropriation that was taken from Water Account 1. It would have flowed back into that or Water Development Account 1. And that bill failed in front of House Appropriations. And that's not surprising because it was House Appropriations that, or maybe it was really Joint Appropriations last year, that decided to take part of the Board of Control out of general fund and put it into Water Development Account 1. So when they received that bill, and that was actually, it made it through the Senate back to the House then referred it to House Appropriations, and they basically did not take an action on the bill, so it failed. And as I understand some of the negotiations that were taking place, is that this bill was the bill that was put forward in exchange for some senators or representatives not contesting the 1920 biennium budget, which takes out of Water Development Account 1 about $13.5 million out to fund the Board of Control. So this process of funding Board of Control operations will continue into the next budget cycle. But this bill, if they could get enough support for this bill, then those senators that supported it said they would not fight the budget where, again, they're taking dollars out of Water 1 to fund the Board of Control. And as I say, it did make it through the Senate, but died in front of House Appropriations. So then moving on to bills that have passed and now have all been signed by the governor. First one is House Bill 66, which is the purchase of Lake DeSmet assets. House approved this bill on a 58-0 to 2. So 58 for, 0 against, and 2 excused. Senate approved it 25-5. And there is an amendment that was tacked onto it in the process, and that amendment requires reporting by the Water Development Commission back to Joint Ag and Joint Appropriations in terms of the operations in terms of what we're doing, and then certainly financial reporting with regards to the reservoir O&M account that will be set up as a result of that bill. But it passed, and so the way the bill is laid out, the next step is now to put in place a purchase agreement between the sellers and the state of Wyoming. That purchase agreement then has to be approved by the commission and the governor. And at that point, then the sale can occur, and whatever's left of the sale or the proceeds. So the sale price is fixed at no more than $2.5 million. The appropriation is $4.5 million. There are some closing costs that would also be included. And then whatever's remaining, so about $2 million, would then flow into a new reservoir O&M account for the operations on DeSmit. And so that project is a go. Governor signed that bill on March 14th, yesterday. The next bill, in-stream flow bill, and by all means ask questions if on any of these bills. That is the bill that would change who is paying for the hydrologic feasibility studies on in-stream flows. Currently, those studies are done by water development. We will select consultants periodically to do those hydrologic studies, and they've been paid for by water development. This bill changed that so that now the Game and Fish will pay for costs related to those studies. Water development still conducts the studies, but Game and Fish will be paying for those studies. And the fiscal note on that bill estimated about $30,000 per year. That's what we've been spending on those hydrologic studies. So that particular bill passed the House 58-0-2 excused. And then the Senate, it passed at 22-8. And those are third reading roll call votes. And the governor signed that bill on March 10th. That the effective date is July 1st, 2018 on the bill.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Evans.
Harry, any indication from Game and Fish this would lessen their enthusiasm to nominate appropriations for in-stream flow or not?
Chairman, we do have a fish who Paul might want to comment.
Sure.
The front, please.
Mr. Chair, Paul Day with Game and Fish. Long way to walk to say no. Change in plans on that. We'll continue at our estimated rate of 1 to 2 to 3 filings per year, I imagine.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, the next bill on my list is House Bill 78, which is the omnibus water bill construction. It passed the House 53-6. These are third reading votes. They do not I didn't pull concurrence on the modified bill after it went to conference committee. Senate passed 26-4. There were several amendments. The first one involved weather mod in the Wind River Mountains, and the bill in its original form from Select Water had a 14% state share, 86% other parties share, downriver states primarily. And so it came through. The House then amended it so that the share was 25-75, which is how the current program is running. It then went on to the Senate, where they amended it back to 14-86. And then in conference committee, ultimately they determined that they would make it a 20%, 80% cost share. So kind of split in between. Now, I was at that conference committee, and this was last Friday, where they were talking about it. And so changing the percentages, I actually provided them with the new numbers. And somehow in that process, a number was missed, or they didn't bother to change the other one. So we now have a bill that I believe there's a mistake in, but it's at this point too late to do anything about it. And that is, if you look at a 20% share of the operations budget, which is projected to be $480,000, the 20% share is $96,000. And there's $10,000 that's also added for office administration costs. So the appropriation amount in the bill is correct at $106,000. However, in the special conditions, and this was what was not picked up, it says that the state will share in operational costs at 20% of actual operational costs, not to exceed $70,000. And it's that $70,000 that should have been changed along with the appropriation amount, and that it should be $96,000 because that's 20% of the operational budget. So that was not picked up in the bill. So we're left with, we can fund 20% of the operational costs, but at $70,000, we are done funding weather mod on this program. And so we've yet, Barry and I have had just some very brief descriptions on what we might do. Can we participate? Yes. We still have to get 80% of the funding from other sources. That's the next really big step, but it may mean that instead of running a 4.5-month program as we have been doing, it may only be a 3-month program going forward if we can get the financial contributions going forward. So there's still some ifs, but that it's unfortunate. But again, when you're changing these things at the last minute, some of the details don't get caught, and that's one that shows up. The next amendment into the project was West Fork. And refresh your memory, that started as a $40 million appropriation request. Made it through House, actually made it through the House Ag Committee. It was re-referred to House Appropriations. They knocked $40 million down to $10 million. And then when it got on the floor, the House took the project totally out. So it was eliminated from the bill. And that's the way it went to the Senate. The Senate Ag Committee handled it, and they put the project back in. And there were different amendments going back and forth. Ultimately, on the Senate floor, I think they were talking about a $40 million, or the $40 million amendment that came out of Senate Ag was not approved. It then came back as a $10 million appropriation on the floor, Senate floor, and that's what was ultimately approved. So we had no bill on, or no project on the House side and a $10 million project on the Senate side. And that conference committee ultimately settled at an amount of $4,698,000. The number that during the conference committee was $5 million, but somewhere in the later negotiations it was reduced slightly. So also then, as part of that appropriation, the original bill had a grant loan split with the sponsor. About 90% grant, about 10% loan. This appropriation does not stipulate, it stipulates $4,698,000 as a grant and does not stipulate a percentage. So I'm interpreting that to mean it's 100% grant. But it is only to be used for land acquisition purposes. So in terms of title work, surveys, cultural resource, hazardous waste investigations on property that we may be acquiring. And it's not just property for the reservoir, which is currently owned by the Forest Service, and there's a private landholder, but it would also be looking at land parcels that we might ultimately swap with the Forest Service as part of a congressional land transfer. That's really kind of the process we're looking at. It also allows those dollars to be used to develop the funding scenario or partnership for funding the entire project. And so there was a lot of discussion in front of House Appropriations about, is Colorado going to share in this project? Part of the lands that benefit are in Colorado. And while we've had conversations with Colorado officials, we do not have an agreement as to funding. And so this appropriation can be used to develop those funding partnerships with beneficiaries, as the bill indicates. But then it goes on to basically say that the legislature has to approve. Well, first of all, it says so we can use the money for land acquisition activities and developing partnerships, but we can't use any of this money until those funding partnerships are in place and the legislature has approved the expenditure. So we have an appropriation that I guess I would say we can't use.
Amen.
Okay. So if this project is to go forward, then we'll be making at least another trip to the legislature, but that'll be a future discussion starting with the commission. So that was the conference committee decision or settlement there. And then lastly, recall that the bill had two funding projects or components for Gillette regional extensions. One was what we're calling phase 3, which is already funded for design, and we were adding the construction dollars. The other one is what we're calling phase 4, and we were funding that for design and construction. And those two projects then got caught up in the current controversy that's occurring up there as to the private wells, stock and domestic, that some have been dewatered. Some are pumping water that has a low pH, and at least some folks believe that that has been caused by the 5 new wells that have been drilled by Gillette. And so the amendment that was added to both of those projects, number one, allows for, and it's directing Gillette to allow for domestic, livestock, and miscellaneous use of that water in Crook County. So Gillette's in Campbell County. The wells are in Crook County, including the Madison wells as well as these private wells, and that's where the contest is taking place now. And it further authorizes or directs Gillette to allow up to 200 taps off of the Gillette Madison system. And it's not these extension projects, but it is some piping that's in and around the 15 Gillette Madison wells. 10 of them are existing, 5 are new. And further then stipulates that water that can be produced out of each of those taps can be upwards or limited to no more than 1 million gallons per year per tap. And then it further allows Crook County or water and sewer district entities in Crook County to tap into an existing Gillette pipeline in Crook County. It's an 8-inch pipeline, and to be extended to further provide access to, again, upwards of 200 taps. And those were the 3 major amendments out of that bill, and the governor signed that bill yesterday. Questions on that?
Mr. Seacon?
Harry, can you, going back to Westbrook, can you remind us how much we've spent thus far, roughly?
So, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Seacon, I don't have the current accounting on the planning. So we've been 10 years in the planning of this reservoir, looking at all kinds of different alternatives in that area. This was judged to be the least environmentally damaging, the reservoir that provided best coverage for irrigation demands or shortages downstream. And I'm just going to estimate that planning effort is $1 million plus effort. We have also an appropriation in place of $7 million to begin permitting, basically, and design of the facility. And of that, we have spent about $800,000 of that appropriation. And then this 4.6 million, 7 million, was in addition to start moving us towards land acquisition and ultimately construction.
That's what I was trying to remember, the 7 million that was already appropriated. So what's your sense after being at the legislature if it's roughly 8 million from the one for the 10 years and the 7? Is it, obviously there's some opposition to going forward. So what is yours and Jason's thinking? I'm sure you guys have met after this and talked about, you know, what, you know, we've got 8 million invested that doesn't seem to be going anywhere.
So, Mr. Chairman, there were a number of issues in opposition to this bill. One was, in fact, there are Colorado lands that may benefit, and the only way they would benefit would be if ultimately they signed up for a contract or a water service agreement out of the reservoir. That's really how it would work and how they could use water. So I think what we're going to have to show, and as the amendment indicates, we've got to have a financial plan in place to fund these other from these other beneficiaries, and that would be the state of Colorado. And so we will move forward with those types of discussions. I know Pat O'Toole, who lives in the valley, and in fact, his ranch would benefit from this project, has been an advocate with regards to his counterparts in Colorado, reaching out to them. And so I expect that there's going to be some kind of bi-state meetings, water users, and ultimately officials with the state of Colorado as to, okay, here's this project, here's what it costs, here's the breakout of percentage of lands that will be benefited in Colorado and Wyoming, and we'll start to work towards some kind of funding agreement. And if we don't have that, I don't know that this project has much of a future. Now, I have spoken to Senator Hicks about this as well, and he is suggesting that we take a look at a couple of other alternative sites for this reservoir, because that's the other problem or hangup at this point, is that this reservoir is partially on Forest Service lands, and we'd wanted dollars to pursue a congressional transfer, which is different than a Forest Service transfer. And if we go through the Forest Service and try to do a land transfer with them, the NEPA process will be much more involved. They will be running a NEPA process to make a decision on whether land should be transferred. So what is the loss of or impacts to wilderness and everything that they look at, recreational opportunities that may be lost, impacts on the environment. They'll look at all of that under a NEPA process, and that'll be a couple 3-year type process at least. And my thoughts are that we're going to spend an extra $1 million or $2 million if we proceed with a Forest Service transfer. If you're able to put in place a congressional land transfer, then that decision to transfer it's made by Congress. And so then the Forest Service takes a much different approach to it. It's not about impacts. That decision's already been made to transfer. Then we have to generate what lands do we need for the reservoir project, and what suitable lands might be acceptable to the Forest Service for a transfer. If we take an acre of Forest Service land here, or do they have private properties or state properties that they might be interested in? So it changes the nature of the whole NEPA process. But I think, so that's certainly an issue, and why we will take a preliminary look at these other sites. Don't know that they have the same benefits, but they are sites that are either state-owned or privately owned. So so that's why we're looking at those alternatives. But I think before we go back to the legislature and ask for the construction funding, we're going to have some type of agreement with the state of Colorado or other water users to say, yes, we're willing to cost share on this project.
But is this, what is the opposite? What is the opposition? Is it the what's the opposition in the legislature, I guess, or what's your sense? Or do they not want to, do they want to still have the little small rainy day fund of account 3 at their fingertips rather than being committed to a project? Or are there other things at play here that that were voiced or not voiced or assumed?
So, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Seekin, there were a number of opposition topics. One was no agreement with Colorado. We're not going to appropriate money, even though the bill provided the protection that we could not start construction until we had the full project funded. But that's definitely one of the items that was quoted. There was a certain segment that said, we don't like dams. There was another segment.
Really quite stunning, but go ahead.
We
don't want to keep Wyoming water in Wyoming, right?
They all coalesced on the House floor. There was another segment that basically was expressing concern that with $60 million remaining in Water Development Account 3, this appropriation would draw it down to 20. And their question was, well, what do we do for future dams? And
those that don't like dams ask that question?
no, this was more a fiscal approach of, do we really want to draw this account down at this time? And they asked about priorities. Do we prioritize projects? And my response is we basically don't. When a project's ready to be built, we bring it forward, and we funded 4 projects so far, and this is number 5 of the governor's 10 and 10 strategy. But there seemed to be a certain amount of alarm that, oh, this account is now it's being whittled down or drawn down to a point where we won't be able to build another reservoir. And that was coming from, I would say, newer legislators who don't understand that in 2005, when this account was created, it had $0 in it. And then it was ultimately brought into a balance of about $150 million. That was by direct legislative appropriations. And I expressed that to them, that in order for us to continue with building dams, then it will require direct legislative appropriations. That's where the money came from. But they were focused on the severance tax distribution that the account receives, which is less than $800,000 a year. And they said, oh, well, we're not going to be able to build a multi-million-dollar project at $800,000 a year. We're never going to get there. But they really
looking at a multi-million-dollar project on their table.
Yes.
So let's save money to build dams by not building dams is basically what they're saying.
Yeah.
And I
sort of strange. Okay.
So a corollary to that, and while it was not actively stated, I think there's a sentiment that if we in fact appropriate $40 million and there isn't any money in this account, then it's not available for reappropriation for other purposes.
Elsewhere. Yes.
And
that's what I was trying to get to.
Okay.
This is a small extra rainy day fund that they don't want to touch.
Chairman, there are some that feel that way. Yes. So
we know the playing field, I guess.
So there, in follow-up to that, then there was at least a request from one representative, and maybe some more, that as an interim topic, they should look at Water Development Account 3. And I don't know whether that's going to make it through the process to ultimately be a topic of discussion this next year.
Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Lancaster.
Harry, I want to jump over to the 2 wells, or the ranchers whose wells are dewatered. What's the DEQ? Is that still on hold? And are those ranchers litigating? Are they just hauling water? What are we going to do there? Or what do you think is going to happen there?
So, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Lancaster, DEQ is very active in pursuing these issues. And so we have I'm going to say a handful, 4 or 5 wells that have been reported to be dewatered. At least 2 of those wells were re-drilled into a deeper aquifer. And that's where they encountered this acid or low pH water. And by low pH, I'm going to say ranges from 3.5 to 5.5, 7 being neutral. And I do find it interesting that when you drink a Diet Coke, for those that do, and I'm one of them, pH is about 3.5. So it's acidic. So, I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it's poor quality groundwater. There's no doubt about it. Those folks still believe that it was in some way impacted by the Gillette-Madison wells. Now, the Gillette-Madison wells are over 2,000 feet deep. The shallow wells that we're talking about depths are in the hundreds of feet. So there's a lot of separation. And so DEQ and the city of Gillette and Water Development, the state engineer's office, we are moving forward with work that we've hired a third-party consultant. We are going back now and going to perform, it may not be a cement bond log, and cement bond logs were run on all of these wells and judged to be adequate, but we're going back and doubling those efforts, and we're going to check them again using a different process to determine whether there's an adequate seal between the casing and the hole that was drilled. And that's a weak spot on any well, that if water from an upper aquifer could drain down the outside of the casing, that's what the seal prevents. It protects lower aquifers from upper aquifers. We're going to go back and revisit that to the cost of, it's going to be $150,000 to do that. And so that work is just getting started. And DEQ has done a significant sampling of 50 plus wells in the area, and they've determined which ones are showing up as low pH. And the intent is to determine whether or not the Gillette-Madison wells were completed properly, and that external seal is really to protect that well from overlying aquifers. Once that work is done, then if the seals are judged to be adequate, then I believe DEQ will authorize all 5 of those wells to be used for drinking water for the Gillette-Madison project. It doesn't answer the question of why did 2 or 3 or 4 of these wells dewater last summer. Don't know. It doesn't answer the question of why there's a low pH aquifer, but there's some supposition that it is naturally occurring and not a result of acid frac that was used on 4 out of the 5 Madison wells that escaped and somehow contaminated this aquifer. I don't believe that's a situation, but so right now we're actively working to try to answer some of those questions, and of course Gillette would very much like to put at least 2 of these wells in service for this summer, because they are on water restrictions every summer, and it was the intent of this project to provide additional water supplies for the city.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Suker.
who's bearing the cost of the $150,000?
Mr. Chairman, I have determined that is an appropriate eligible cost under the Gillette-Madison project. And it's a $217 million project. Water, I'll say the state of Wyoming, through multiple appropriations, is providing 2/3 of that amount. And we absolutely have to be able to demonstrate that these wells were constructed properly and they are safe. And so these additional costs will be added to the well contractors that are still employed by Gillette. Gillette will pay for the other 1/3 of the matching cost. Right now, this budget is estimated to be $30 million under budget. So there is dollars in the budget to do this, but yes, we're making that as eligible project costs.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Sir.
So continuing on, Small water projects, Senate File 53, that has passed. House passed it at 35 to 25 with 2 excused. The Senate passed it 30-0. Governor signed it on March 9th. This is the project, or the bill, excuse me, that eliminates the $135,000 cap for small water projects. However, the effective date is July 1st of this year. So tomorrow you're going to handle a number of small water projects. I believe, Jody, is it 3? 3 of those exceed the $135,000 threshold. That's the application that came in. And so what we will be, the recommendation you have in front of you or in your notebook says we recommend funding. However, I want to add to that, while we're recommending funding, statutorily, you cannot fund it until after July 1st, or those 3 projects. So I'm going to suggest that you table or defer action on those 3 projects if you want to consider them. Because statutorily, the bill that authorized small water projects grabbed, well, it specifically cites that the definition of a small water project is $135,000. This new bill eliminates that after July 1st. So you have a group of projects, well, 3 of them in particular, that exceed that threshold. And so statutorily, you cannot award them dollars at your meeting tomorrow. But knowing that the bill has been signed and will change that limitation on July 1st, you can certainly take those up after July 1st and consider them at that point in time.
Commissioner Seekin.
I'm glad you brought that. Construction, is the construction bill, is that effective when the governor signed it?
Yes, it was effective yesterday.
Was the July 1st something that the legislature put in, or was an accident, or we did that by accident, or how did that happen?
So, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Seekin, this was a bill that was brought through Select Water. You were aware of the bill. This is not a Water Development Commission bill. And the vast majority of bills handled by the legislature are all effective July 1st. That is the standard. That begins the new biennium. And it is the exception when you see bills that become effective upon signature. And so our funding bills, all 3, DeSmit, planning, and construction, are effective immediately. But the other bills are July 1st for an effective date.
The 25 who were in opposition, was that mostly because of the threshold, or were there other reasons that they were opposed to the bill?
That, I didn't really listen to the discussion, so I don't have a good feel of why. There was, I think there was there was some discussion that, this is a small water project, and there ought to be a definition for that. And when you suddenly open it up to an unlimited size project, have we moved away from the intent? Yeah, it's no longer small water. There was some of that. I don't know whether that led to, and I think there was some that just said, we think the program's running fine the way it is. Leave it alone. Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, the next project is Senate File 54, Water Development Requirements. And this one, I will say, when you read the bill, it in essence eliminates, in most cases, the requirement for an O&M maintenance fund. And recall that in our bills, we reference some general conditions that require that the sponsor shall provide, and the language used there is a repair and maintenance sinking fund. And staff works with the sponsor, we want to see an account set up or supplemental appropriations into an existing maintenance account. And so that's the way we're working it. This bill basically says that if the sponsor can demonstrate that, in fact, it has the ability to fund not repair and maintenance, operation and maintenance, so there's a little difference in wording that Daniel and I have spoken about, then they're not required to have an operation and maintenance account. And I would relate to you that the sponsors we deal with, municipalities, special districts, all have taxing authority or the ability to provide assessments, and therefore they meet that requirement. So no need for operation and maintenance accounts. It then goes on to say that if a sponsor can't demonstrate the ability to fund an operation and maintenance account and they have a loan, then the commission needs to develop criteria on how much and the details of operation and maintenance accounts. It further states that if those accounts cannot exceed 10% of the project cost, and once the loan is paid off, then there's no need for an operation and maintenance account. So I think practically speaking, the intent is to eliminate the need for operation and maintenance accounts, and I would go as far as to say, and that includes repair and maintenance sinking funds or accounts. Now, this one also, well, let me just tell you, passed the Senate 30-0, passed the House 50-0 with 2 excused, and it has an effective date of July 1st. The construction bill, which has an effective date of yesterday, has the provision. We referenced the general conditions from the previous projects that it requires repair and maintenance sinking funds. And so the contracts that you're going to review tomorrow have that provision in there. This new bill does not come into play until July 1st. So to me, the logical way to proceed is that this current group of projects will be required to provide evidence of a repair and maintenance fund in an amount suitable to the commission. And then July 1st will come, the new bill will go into place, and the next round of construction projects, we will take that provision out because, again, I think the most recent action from the legislature says we don't need operation and maintenance accounts except if there's a loan. And so we'll be talking about this more, but you'll see in tomorrow's contracts that they do require repair and maintenance sinking funds.
Mr. Glick.
When they say repair, does that mean like they're trying to push the those entities to, or them water users to pay for the big repairs on the, like, whatever their project is? Is that what the reasoning for the repair is?
Well, so Mr. Chairman, the general conditions that we reference in the construction bill go back to a set of projects that were funded in 1998. So we grab those same conditions out and we apply those to the current round of construction projects. And it is, yes, the intent, here's what I think the philosophy has been from the legislature as well as the commission, and that is if the commission is going to invest considerable dollars in the form of a 67% grant in your project, then we expect the sponsor to repair and maintain that project for the life of the project. And that's been somewhat in contention of, well, how much is that and how long do we have to maintain these accounts? But we are not expecting to invest in a new project and then have the sponsor, walk away from it and say, well, as long as it runs, we're going to keep running it. But if it quits running, we'll go back to the state and ask for more dollars. That's the intent. We're going to build it for you and we expect you to maintain it. And that's the reason for that provision.
The reason I was asking was, like, if something was built and, and it came apart and it was like a project that was using existing structure but added onto it and the existing structure came apart, do they have to repair that? Or can they come back to the Wyoming Water Development Office to try to get that portion fixed?
So, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Glick, the way the language reads is you're required to establish a repair and maintenance sinking fund for the project And that means the project that's being funded, the new work. So if another part of the system, which is existing, were to come apart, we'd hope that they have a maintenance program in place that they could repair that, but they would be eligible to come back to the program and say, well, you rebuilt section A of our transmission line, but now section B has fallen apart. We need money for section B. That would be an eligible project. It's only the project that we're funding, so the new work.
Okay, I was just asking because there's a diversion that was built by Wyoming Water Development Funds, matching with the Bureau's funds, and that they just added on to the old existing structure, and the old part of the structure is coming apart, but the new structure is still there. That's why I was asking.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to continue, then I would think if the tribes wanted to pursue rehab of that existing part of the structure, then that would be an eligible project we would consider.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Commissioner Suker?
Harry, with looking at the sinking fund, it appears to me that that could be all over the board. How is that determined, that percentage that should be put away as a sinking fund? How do you determine that? Because there's a huge difference between a pipeline job and one that has a pump station, for example, because of the mechanical ability of that pumping station to perform. There's where your maintenance is. It may not be in the line. It might be on anything. A downhole pump would be another factor that you're going to pump groundwater out of. But how's that determined?
So, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Suker, and this is Brian's shop, we look at a number of factors. We look at the type of component. So pipeline is generally a component that doesn't have moving parts. It's buried, and we look at the expected life of that facility. So pipelines, we're talking at least 50 years of life. When you have mechanical components, then we recognize a shorter life. And in fact, that they, in terms of, a pump may only last 20 years. So you need to be putting some dollars away that you will be ready to replace that pump when suddenly it should fail. And we look at, we plug that into the economic analysis so that if we look at a pump that needs to be replaced in 20 years, then we reduce that back to an annual payment. You should be putting so many dollars away every year in anticipation that you're going to replace that pump. With a pipeline, it's much further out. And when we run that analysis, then it becomes a unique number for each project that we do. But we look at the specifics of the project. And in most cases, and we share that with the sponsor. And I think they've found that, in fact, our numbers are reasonable. They're not exorbitant that say, oh, we can't afford that. It's really to put them on notice that you need to have a fund available so that if something happens, you can repair this facility. And there are some dollars put away for pipelines because occasionally a water line will break, and you've got to have some dollars to do that. But it's specific to each project.
Mr. Lancaster?
What's the state average of a culinary water user? Do you know the price they pay per month? Is it 50, 70?
Mr. Chairman, that's a municipal water system survey question. Okay. So I don't know if you heard that, Chris, with words, we go out and survey municipal and water providers, and he just said it's about $36 per month per user is a typical cost.
People ask me that a lot.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, you might find of interest if you have not looked at that municipal survey, and that's available online. And isn't it, Chris? Yeah. So if you can't find it, we can certainly direct you there. But it gathers a lot of information from public water systems around the state.
Other questions? Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, the last bill, Senate File 62, which was the planning bill, I saved the easiest for last. And maybe this is due to Barry and Jody's good work through the year. Came through the Senate 30-0. Then came through the House 59-0 with one excused. No amendments. Very few questions, and the governor signed it yesterday. So the planning set of planning projects are moving forward. Yeah. And Mr. Chairman, that's probably enough for a legislative wrap up.
Any questions on the legislative update? Okay, Harry, consultant shortlists.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Barry Lawrence, Planning Division, Water Development. If you turn to tab H in your notebook, we're going to walk through the consultant selection process, and the list that you have is the resulting list of that process. And as we talk today, some of the items on the agenda, we're going to talk old process and new process. If you remember, starting March 1, we're in double process right now. So we've got the old process, the tail end of the old process going on, and we've started up the new process. So this refers to the old process. We're finishing out this round of applications through, funding through the legislature and now into consultant selection. So to start briefly, solicitation for these projects began early January. There are 19 projects. And kind of a three-prong approach. We posted the information, obviously, on our agency website. We ran advertisements in the Casper Star for 4 successive Fridays. And then we also Katie sent out to our extensive consultant email list all this information relative to these projects, and that we were seeking solicitation here for information and qualifications. So we had a deadline of Tuesday, February 6th at 2 p.m. and that deadline was strictly adhered to. And I will tell you that the SOIs or SOQs came in by that time. They were disseminated to the project managers, and then they had their task was to go through that for all the projects that they were assigned, the ones that came in the door. And then they had to follow the guidelines. And these guidelines were approved by the commission on August 19th, 2011. And just to remind you what they had to look at, they had to look at residency of the firms. They had to look at the ability of professional personnel. They had to look at past performance. They had to look at willingness to meet time requirements. They had to look at location, current and projected workloads, the volume of work previously awarded to the firm by the commission, and then also equitable distribution of contracts among qualified firms. So all those things, body of work that they had to evaluate for those projects and for the information that was submitted. The idea here is to come up with a minimum of 3 firms to include on the short list for each of the projects, if possible. And when I say if possible, you'll see that in some cases we didn't have 3 firms put in, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But the idea being 3 firms, ideally with a maximum of 5 firms. And so that process concluded, and I will tell you, and this is the fun part, I get to tell you some factoids. Factoids about who came in and on the projects. I did this last year and it seemed to go over well, so I'm doing it again. We'll see how this goes. 19 projects. We had 91 submissions came in the door. And you want to know how does that compare to last year? Last year we had 99 submissions, but we had 23 projects. So we had 4 less projects, but we had only 8 less submissions. I'll give you an idea there. So if we look at by project, we had 1 project, the Hanover Irrigation District Bighorn Flume project. As I mentioned, that is the one project that only received interest from 1 firm. Okay, that's the low end of the spectrum. The high end of the spectrum, we had the Saratoga Master Plan, which we had 9 firms go after. Okay, average number of submissions per project, 4.8, or approximately 5 submissions from consultants per project for those 19 projects. So after our shortlisting process, of the 91 submissions, 80 are still standing. In other words, 80 of those submissions are still live, that are still active, haven't been eliminated. Only 11 have been eliminated, or 12%. Okay. We can also look at it by firm. That's always very interesting. We received submissions from 46 different firms. Okay. That compares to last year, 44 firms. Okay, so 2 more firms. We had 22 firms seeking 1 project. We had 13 firms seeking 2 projects, 5 firms going after 3 projects, 5 firms going after 4 projects, and then we had 1 firm going after 8 projects. Okay. So the average there is approximately 2 projects per firm. So save the one outlier that I mentioned there, firms are being pretty strategic and not shotgunning the approach here. All 46 firms still are in the running. Okay. In other words, they still have 1 live submittal. Okay. That has not been eliminated. And so every firm in the hunt is at least being shortlisted has 1 project still in the hunt, as I mentioned. So lastly, and this is always interesting to look at the Wyoming firms versus non-Wyoming firms, of the 80 submissions still standing, 75% of those are from Wyoming firms. 25% are from out-of-state primes. That compares to 83 and 17 last year. The shortlisting is complete. This process was done by our project managers, and the RFPs on all these projects went out March 5th. And I'd stand for any questions.
Questions for Barry? No, I don't see any questions for you, Barry.
Okay, that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Job well done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, with that, the next item is consultant selection schedule.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, continuing on. Building on that now, we have the RFPs out for those firms, all those submissions that I mentioned to you. Proposals are due back in our office Friday, March 30th at 1 o'clock. And we are strict about that. If you're 2 minutes late, you're out of luck. So we do watch that closely. When those come in, then Katie has the arduous task of bundling them up and getting them out to all the selection teams. And it's very important that we have the addresses of where you're going to be so that those proposals go to the right location. I don't know, Katie, you want to say anything about that? Or no, as long as you've got, that's it in a nutshell. Make sure she knows where you're going to be so we get the proposals to you. Okay. The assignments on these teams for these projects have not changed. There shouldn't be anything new to you. These were what you had last fall. Okay. We didn't have to make reassignments because of changing commissioners or anything like that. So these are all the same. And then the guidelines for reviewing the proposals, and we can certainly pass this around. These will be going out in the boxes of proposals that lays out. And this is what we came up with a couple years ago. The commission came up with for reviewing the proposals and so forth. And remember, we're going by state statute 9-2-1031, which we have to follow for engineering service selection. And some of the similar things that I ran through for the shortlisting, you'll have to do here. And so you'll get in your box of proposals, you'll get these guidelines. You'll also get some companion documents. One thing you'll get a list of work previously awarded. And that'll be generated by our office. Andy in our office generates that. So you can see, and that'll be for the last 5 years. So you can see the firms that are in the hunt on whatever project you're on. Those firms, if we have information relative to what they've been awarded in the past 5 years, we'll provide that to you. And then also this year, this will be the second year doing this, the consultant performance spreadsheets. If you remember, we started going back all the way to January 1 of 2016. We're now doing, basically, for the lack of a better term, report cards on consultants as they finish projects. And so you'll get that information for the firms that are in the hunt on your project. So that'll be in your box as well. And if you remember, at this point in time, prices are not considered at this phase. That's later. That's when you get to the interviews and so forth. What you're going to get is those proposals, and we'll need those rankings back to Katie, and this is key, April 12th. So that's approximately 10 days, okay? From the time those go out, we'll need those a little more than 10 days. Now, the good news is this is old process, compressed process. You know, we've talked about under the new process later this year, believe it or not, you'll have to do this whole procedure later this year on another round of projects. You're going to have about double that amount of time. You're going to have almost 20 days or 3 weeks to do that process. So it's going to be better in that regard. So, but April 12th, and if you remember, Mr. Chairman, it's like a golf score, 1 through 5, 1 being the best, you know, and 5 the worst. So, so we will get those rankings. You'll send those into Katie. She will tally them all up, and then the top 3 firms will get interviews. Then we'll proceed to the interview schedule, and I will tell you, we'll hand these out. Yeah, go ahead. And I've got names on them individually. I went ahead.
Take my glasses.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we've gotten, and Harry's passing out, I've got individual schedules for each of you. This is the proposed consultants interview schedule. The interviews are going to be held Tuesday, May 15th through Thursday, May 17th. And the bulk of the interviews will be on Wednesday and Thursday. There are 2 that we have to do on Tuesday afternoon. And you'll notice that we're going to do, as we have in the past, we have a sponsor briefing. We'll be doing sponsor briefings before each set of interviews. So afternoon interviews, we'll do sponsor briefings at 12:30, and then we'll begin the interviews at 1. And then in the morning, we'll also do sponsor briefings at 7:30, and then interviews start at 8. And of course, we'll repeat the process. So Tuesday afternoon, all day Wednesday, and all day Thursday. That is the proposal. And so you can see now, and one thing I know you're going to latch onto right away, if you look at the rightmost column, almost every commissioner's got a break at some point in time, so that where you wouldn't have a set of interviews. And if you see that, that's over on the right-hand column. And I think the big winner or loser in this case may be Jeanette. So I think you've got some breaks there. So you're okay with that. Okay. There are no reassignments here. As I mentioned, we didn't have to do any changes. And there will also, as we also talked about, there are no interviews for the Hanover Flume project. That is the one project where we only received one proposal or one statement of interest qualification. They were qualified. We've sent the RFP to that firm, and we're expecting a proposal in the door, but it's already been discussed with the people in that committee and so forth. The decision was made not to do a proposal, not to do an interview for that one, as long as we get a quality proposal. So the main thing I would need today is that's the schedule. If there's any critical flaws that you see for some reason that we need to make changes, I'm hoping not. There was a lot of work that went into that to get everything, all the pieces, parts to line up. But we need to get those resolved. If there's any critical flaws, please let me know immediately. So, and with that, I will stand for questions.
Questions on the schedule for Barry?
It sounds like I got to come to Cheyenne.
Yes, you do. Okay, I guess that's it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Barry. Oh, you're still on, probably, huh? New level 1 and level 2 project applications.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
New stuff.
Now we're going to switch gears. As I mentioned, now we're in new process. So everything we've talked about up to this point was old process, finishing up this round of consultant selection. These are new applications. What Harry's handed out is new applications that we received by the new March 1st deadline. And to refresh everybody's memory, the thought being that we're going to get these applications in by March 1st. We're going to start the process, and the idea being that we're going to do consultant selection prior to going into the legislature. So we'll have that totally done before we get in the legislature. And we also are not setting project budgets on these projects. These will be what the market will bear. So before you see 10 projects, I should tell you, you know, moving up the deadline 5 months, it was real interesting to see what type of response we were going to get. You know, we tried to get the word out as best we could about this moved up deadline. One of the things we did, obviously, last year, we had press releases. We put it on our agency website. Katie emailed our distribution list, and we also had it in our winter newsletter that we were moving up the application deadline. So those are things we did kind of traditionally. The other things, we reached out to WACD, conservation districts, and dealt with Bobby Frank, make sure she got the word out to all her districts. Reached out to Rick Kaysen with WAM, and he sent a mass email to all the municipalities that belong to WAM. That went out. Also reached out to Mark Pepper with Wyoming Association of Rural Water Systems, and he sent a mass email out to 865 water system operators that went out across the state, 865 of those. And then we also sent emails to more than 70 irrigation districts for which we had email addresses in our irrigation district surveys. So I really think that, you know, we tried to get the word out as best we could. That having been said, we received 10 applications, and you might want to know, well, how's that compare? Well, obviously we're in the middle of consultant selection for 19 projects, the old go round. New go round, we got about half as many this first time. Okay. So that's where we are. The handout there, one thing I will notice and mention to you right away, you won't see one watershed study. We received no applications for watershed studies this time. So that's for, and these are for projects that would, you know, going through legislature and everything, we would theoretically begin late spring of 2019. Okay. So no watershed studies. We did receive applications for 4 municipal master plans, 1 irrigation district master plans, and then 5 level 2 feasibility studies, some of which are continuing. And I should mention there, in blue are assignments that have been made by this office relative to commissioner participation, shadowing these projects. And the ones that we aren't in blue, where there's commissioners, these are ones that are continuing on that those commissioners were already on these projects. So those are no changes there. But and we can walk through these briefly. First, Evanston Water Master Plan. and that obviously Water Division 4 and a municipal water master plan. It's been some time since they've had one. I think it's 20 or 30 years actually. Salt Creek Edgerton Midwest Master Plan. It's more of a regional look. They've got 40 some miles of pipeline to Central Regional Water out of Casper. And then also they want to look at the Midwest and Edgerton systems as well. It's been a number of years since they've done anything as well. The Sundance West Water Supply, and that project is rural domestic, potentially connecting up to the city of Sundance. It is currently, they're in the process of district formation. It's right now a homeowners association. And so they're in the process of district formation. The fourth project there, Torrington Water Master Plan and Municipal Water Master Plan. So pretty straightforward projects there. Under level 1 projects rehabilitation, we have the Upper Bluff Irrigation District Master Plan. So Irrigation District Master Plan. Level 2 projects, new development. The first one there, the Bighorn Regional Southern Water Supply, Phase 2. This would be an add-on to our current project being managed by Kevin Boyce in our office. And they want to look at source supply and feasibility and looking at Madison Well and so forth down south there. And they want to continue on and do more work. Right now, that study is ongoing. Buffalo Groundwater Supply, Phase 2, another add-on asking for additional work being managed by Keith Clary in our office. And they want to look at investigate alluvial well field development. And then the third one there, Hog Island Water Supply, and that's out of south of Jackson there. I know some of you are very familiar with that. And they want to do additional work, and they're looking at a test well and feasibility study. And then the last two projects are irrigation district rehabilitation projects. The Boulder Irrigation District, they're in Sublette County. They are looking at a spillway repair and modernize their canal. And then LaPrelle Irrigation District, this is a continuation. Chase DeVille is managing that project for our office. And they're looking at further conceptual designs and cost estimates of what's coming out of that master plan. So those are the 10 projects that we received applications for. We'll be starting the process. And one of the things I would need to know is if anyone that with these assignments we've made, if there's a conflict in any way, I would need to know that right away so we can do reassignments. But the thing to know is our project managers are out now doing project recommendations, under the new process, while they're dealing with consultants under the old process, getting ready, ramping up for proposals. They're also out doing site visits and so forth. And because of a timing issue, obviously, a couple of these have already taken place that I'm aware of. There'll be some more next week and so forth. And we can certainly, if folks that want to be involved, we can do that if they haven't already been held. But it was just a timing issue this time. But what we're ramping up for is obviously that May meeting where you're going to do your consultant interviews. And then on Friday, you approve the consultant selections. But then normally that's it. But this time you're also under the new process going to have 10 recommendations for new projects where the sponsors are here, much like a November meeting. But we'll have these 10 new planning projects, and we'll be seeking authorization for us to begin the consultant selection process, because that'll be the trigger right after that meeting for Katie to start the advertising on those 10 new projects. And with that, I'll stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Barry? No questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thanks, Barry. Next on the agenda would be weather mod program update.
So, Mr. Chairman, just a brief introduction. And Julie is going to provide a PowerPoint to get you up to speed on where we're at with regards to an appropriation that was made a couple of years ago to start weather mod programs in a number of other ranges besides the Wind River range. We have been working on this for a couple of years now, and there are still dollars available in this appropriation. So we want to first bring you up to speed on where we're at in each of these ranges, and then make a recommendation ultimately for spending the balance of that appropriation with some weather mod. And with that, I don't know if all of you have met Julie. Julie Gonzar is a relatively new employee that comes with a good resume with regards to weather and forecasting. So it's a good match in terms of weather mod. But so we'll walk you through here, and then we can have a discussion on where we think we ought to go, and certainly gather your input in that regard. So go ahead, Julie. Can everybody see the screen? Kellen and Dave, you may want to move.
Please feel free to move around if you can't see the screen, and if you're comfortable, we'll turn the lights down a bit here. Okay, so thank you very much. Julie Gonzar, project manager.
I have to move the mic closer to you. I don't know.
You need my comment through on on the mic.
Lift it up. No, just the, yeah, there you go.
Okay. 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 I'll try to stand close to it and make sure it turns red. Okay. So the purpose of this presentation is to give kind of an overview of the three major studies and design studies that have come out of the specifically the 2015 water construction bill. This was passed with an appropriation of about $1.4 million, and this large appropriation, the purpose of this was to kind of jumpstart exploring the potential of weather modification operations across the entire state of Wyoming. So it looked at 4 different mountain ranges. The sponsor was, of course, our office. And these studies kind of focused on increasing snowpack, so snowpack augmentation on higher elevations of these mountains. So the studies included climatology, hydrology, design and permitting, and looking at weather forecasting and cost estimates, among other things. So this is a map kind of talking about or showing all the different mountain ranges that were explored. There were 3 studies that came out of this. The first one was the Laramie Range Mountains, Bighorn Mountains, and the third study combined the Sierra Madres and the Medicine Bow Mountain ranges together. So we'll go back to this map as we go through the 3 different studies. So I wanted to include kind of a basic overview of what is cloud seeding and what is weather modification, just as a review. Always important to kind of go back to the basics. So cloud seeding has been a technology that's been used since the 50s. Wyoming is not the only state to be doing this. There's a lot of other states in the western half of the nation that's been conducting these types of operations. A lot of the western states do this primarily to increase snowpack. So it's called orographic. And some other states do this type of technology and weather modification for other reasons that are more important to their state, like suppressing hail, diminishing fog, and increasing rainfall. But for purposes of Wyoming and a lot of the other states with high mountains, the goal is to increase snowpack. Essentially, it's storage as snow. So a quick review on the science of seeding clouds. So when I say orographic, essentially, that just means that we have these mountain barriers here, and air is forced to move up the slope of the mountain barrier, and that air will cool and condense into clouds. And in the wintertime, those clouds will often form snow, and snow will fall. So in order to tap into this moisture, we need to find clouds that are cold enough to have what's called supercool water. Supercool water is liquid water drops that are below freezing, but still as liquid water. So what they're looking for is a little particle, and you can think of it as a piece of salt or a piece of dust to freeze onto. So once that supercool water has a particle to freeze onto, it'll turn into an ice crystal, and the ice crystal will turn into snow. So to help make that process a little bit more efficient in the clouds, silver iodide particles are emitted into that cloud, and that can happen a couple of different ways, either from ground-based generators that would burn that particle and that would move up into the cloud and hopefully over the mountain barrier, or silver iodide can be emitted or ejected into the cloud through some type of aircraft or flares. Once those particles are in the cloud and supercooled water is also there, that water will attach to those particles, turn into ice crystals. The ice crystals will grow, they'll collide, form snow, and then fall out of the cloud. And we have a little bit of additional snow to help with increasing snowpack. A few other important facts to think about when talking about weather modification and seeding clouds. Silver iodide, it initiates the freezing process of water. but of the water that already exists in the cloud. So we're not adding any additional moisture into the cloud. It's taking what's already there and making it a bit more efficient. Also, it's a large scale, it's not a large scale process. Seeding clouds is very micro scale and very small scale, so very limited to the specific target area that we're targeting. And as a result, does not significantly impact any type of precipitation downwind. Silver iodide does not dissolve, so the environmental impact is very small. And we can think of it in one way. There has been a lot of sampling of silver in the snow from a couple different studies in the area. And they found about less than 4 parts per billion silver in the snow in some of these target areas. Well, according to the EPA, the upper level for silver that's allowed in drinking water is 100 parts per billion. So just a little bit of a perspective there. So negligible impact on the environment, as the research, as the science shows to this point. Essentially, it's an inexpensive way to improve water storage. And also, I did want to point out that almost all operational programs have some type of strict suspension criteria. So whether or not that relates to if there's an avalanche danger going on at a certain time, or if there's above average snowpack. Okay, so we will start to talk about the 3 different studies. So the first one is the Laramie Range. This siting and a design study was actually completed last year. The closeout memo was completed in June of 2017. The final contract amount was about $323,000. And again, the purpose here was to assess the feasibility of cloud seeding technology for that mountain range. So looking at a ground-based or an aircraft type program. Public comment on this project was generally good support with a few ranching concerns. And if you have questions about that, I can answer that. So the target area on the Laramie Range was kind of focused towards the northern and the northwestern part of the mountain range. It was important for us to make sure that we stayed away from the southern part of the range that crosses I-80. So the focus was actually right around here, where the peaks are the highest, the temperatures are the coldest, and it's the best potential for snow. So a couple different, so there was a climatology analysis that was completed for this area, and it was determined that there was an equal amount of northwesterly flow and northeasterly flow. So depending on the type of pattern that would come in, would help determine whether or not an aircraft program would be appropriate or a ground-based program. Aircraft was determined to be highly effective, but there was a chance that the opportunity would be slightly less than a ground-based, but ground-based is not as effective as an aircraft type program. So for purposes of this study, just to kind of be on the safe side, they determined to start with a ground-based for just a year or two and then reevaluate the effectiveness of aircraft. So taking a look at all the different types of programs that could happen in this range. And you'll see here on this graphic on the right, the little pinpoints indicate potential locations for ground-based generators. And they had a couple different options for ground-based generators. So that's what the colors indicate here. The red dotted lines indicate potential aircraft tracks if that type of program would be initiated. The cost for a full ground-based program, which would be about 19 different generators, was over $500,000. And then for a smaller ground-based program, the cost would be much less. And because the focus was on ground-based for this study, cost estimate was not done for an airborne program. So taking a look at the cost efficiency as it relates to hydrology, so SWE is snow water equivalent. And the determination was that an estimated increase in runoff in the spring by about 2 to 10%. And so with the conclusion of their study, they decided that a well-targeted, fully operational program would be right around in the range of 6 to 8% increase runoff, which would lead to about 16,000 to 20,000 acre feet. And that would boil down to a cost per acre foot of about $25 to $30. As completed in 2014, the pilot study that was conducted over 10 years also indicated a determination that the cost effectiveness would be about $25 to $30 per acre foot. So we were not surprised to see this come out of this study, and that was a positive thing. Okay, so that is the Laramie Range study, very brief. Moving on to the Bighorn Mountains. So tomorrow I will be presenting a closeout memo for this particular study. And for now, I put the estimated original contract amount, which is approximately $320,000. Again, the purpose of this study is to assess the feasibility of the technology of seeding clouds. The benefit would be for the Bighorn, Powder, and Tongue River basins. Public comment, not a whole lot of yes or no, or public comment in general. That does not mean that there wasn't a whole lot of support here, but just not a whole lot of comments at these meetings. So a little bit challenging to see this photo on the right, but it is a picture of, it's a graphic of the Bighorn Mountains. Again, an analysis was done of climatology, and again, the predominant winds are mostly out of the west and northwest, but of course we always have events of upslope, and we have all these Arctic fronts that come in out of the north and northeast. And so this particular mountain range can get a lot of upslope on the eastern and the northeastern side. The biggest difference between this mountain barrier and a lot of the other mountain barriers in our state is just the level of steepness that this mountain barrier has. It's very extreme in a lot of areas. And so because of that, it was highly recommended that an aircraft or an airborne type design would be really effective in this case. Trying to place ground-based generators at high elevation makes it extremely challenging for accessibility. It's a lot of extra money to get maintenance guys up there. And so there's just a lot more complications with the ground-based generators. So aircraft was the obvious choice. Based on the climatology and all the model runs, it looked like the opportunity to seed with generators was about 19% and 39% seedable storms by aircraft. If an aircraft program would, so an aircraft program in this particular case would result in greater than 50% success in the target area of increasing stream flow. Okay, so this graphic over here comes right from the report. By the way, all these studies are on our website. So the reports and the summaries, which are significantly smaller and more readable, are also on our webpage. So taking a look at an aircraft program and a ground base, so you can see the difference in cost here. It's actually a lot more cost efficient and cost effective with aircraft. That would just be one plane, about $353,000, and the approximate cost per acre foot would also be lower than ground-based. So this graphic over here simply shows the triangles here are indications of where ground-based generators could be potentially placed, and then these white lines are indications of where an aircraft track may be based on the predominant winds of the storm. So taking this kind of to the conclusion of the study, the results here, you can see this is the ground-based column, and these are aircraft design. We've got the total cost for an operational program across the top and the cost per acre foot dependent on the snow water equivalent. So dependent on the increases in stream flow that were determined from the study in 2014. So just kind of looking at these numbers really briefly, it's obvious that an aircraft design would be more cost efficient and cost effective. There also is a really good chance that an aircraft program would be able to target up to 80% of the area. So that's why this third column is included here. But this was the recommendation from the consultant for pursuing an aircraft operational program. Miss anything? Okay. And the third and final study focused on the Sierra Madres and Medicine Bow Mountains as a whole. So again, I'll be presenting a closeout memo tomorrow on this particular study. The final report was completed in December this past year. Original estimated contract amount was about $419,000, and I'll have better numbers for final contract amount tomorrow. So again, same purpose, to address the feasibility of weather modification in this area to benefit the North Platte Basin. Also, if you look at this map closely, the western edge of the Sierra Madres drains into the Green River Basin, which ultimately drains into the Colorado River Basin. So we've got a couple different areas that would benefit here. Public comment, a lot of really positive verbal and written comments from this type of study with just a few concerns. So overall, good support here. So predominant winds for this part of the state are out of the west and northwest. And really interesting, this area in Wyoming has a very high potential for seeding a lot of storms. As you can see here, the percentages are quite high compared to the percentages for some of the other mountain ranges, especially by aircraft. Over 50% of storms could potentially be seeded. So that is kind of an interesting indication of the potential for this part of the state. Again, an aircraft program would likely result in a greater impact area than 50%. And then the graphic, okay, so this is the ground-based program, although aircraft was recommended, but we'll take a look at both. So for this program, you can see that the possibility of putting ground generators exists on both mountain ranges, and the consultants decided on 23 ground generators. The cost is quite high compared to what you'll see soon as an aircraft. So about $656,000 to run this type of program, and that's just for 1 year, for one season, or about 4 to 6 months. And the cost is so high, again, because ground-based generators, they require a lot more attention by maintenance. They're hard to access, and you really want to get those ground generators as high in elevation as you can so that you're sure that the seeding agent has the ability to go up and over the mountains. Part of the study did include a whole bunch of suggestions for reducing costs for this type of program. So taking a look at an aircraft program, a lot less expensive to run for one year. And with aircraft, you're able to do agent to widow. So you're not kind of limited to just one point on the map. And it's probably hard to see this, but there are different colored lines here that indicate the aircraft tracks that would be possible for this type of program. Of course, it would depend on the wind flow and the type of storm that's coming in. So looking at the results from this study and comparing ground-based design to an airborne design, you can just see all the differences here, especially the estimated costs per acre foot. Quite lower than a ground-based generator type program, and the cost is a lot nicer as well. So this was also a permitting study for program permitting necessary to fly over the Medicine Bow National Forest. So as you know, we've got a national forest on our hands here, but for a ground-based program, we would need to apply for a special use permit. And so as part of the study, a special use permit application was submitted, and it was denied the first time because we didn't meet the minimum criteria. So we made amendments, and a special applications permit, or special use permit, rather, was submitted again, and it was approved by the Forest Service, and we were told that they would be in touch on pushing that through their process. Unfortunately, there was a delay in communications, and throughout that time period, and we can talk about this a little bit more tomorrow too, because there's a recommendation that will come with this. But throughout the time period that lapsed, the determination to move towards aircraft and that recommendation really, the consultants had high confidence in an aircraft type program. So we just kept the focus there. So staying right in the North Platte River Basin, as you probably know, part of this basin extends into a piece of northern Colorado. And towards the middle and end period of this study, we were contacted by the North Platte Basin Roundtable and the Jackson County Conservancy District. And they heard about the study that we were doing and were interested in collaborating. So of course, this would be a direct benefit to Wyoming, since this is the headwaters of the North Platte River. Any additional snowpack in the mountains over this part of Colorado would directly benefit southeastern Wyoming as the flow would move north. So we did a little bit of additional work that was completed to explore options over the state line. The main point that I want to bring to the table here is just that this could potentially be an add-on to a weather modification program for the Medbo and Sierra Madre ranges. Of course, any and all seeding opportunities in Colorado would be paid by them, and this would all be under contract or with some type of state-to-state agreement. So we explored the possibility here. So right away, you'll notice this red line is just the outline of the North Platte Basin. So Walden is right here in the middle, just for orientation. And we just looked at all the different mountain ranges that had the potential for seeding. And noticing here, this is Wyoming. So these aircraft tracks come from the previous study that was just completed. And so just kind of discovering and exploring opportunities to extend aircraft tracks over state boundaries. And so these are some possible options for the mountain ranges in the upper North Platte Basin. So how this would work potentially is the North Platte Basin would get their money from the Colorado Water Conservation District. And like I said earlier, pending any type of contract and state-to-state agreement, all expenses or all expendables would be paid by Colorado, like flight hours, fuel, seeding agent, permitting, and any type of evaluation that would be necessary on their part. So in looking at the Wyoming piece of the program again, some new information came to light about the type of aircraft that would be the best option to use. So it looks like a slightly larger aircraft, not only for safety, but it's able to carry more flares, so more seeding agent. And if we were to expand the target area, that would mean that a bigger plane would be required to kind of meet those boundaries. Okay, so that is a summary of the work that's been done underneath this appropriation from the 2015 construction bill. There is approximately, and that's a pretty close number, but there's approximately $438,000 that is remaining as part of this appropriation. And the recommendation going forward from the office is that we move forward and initiate an airborne cloud seeding program for 1 year in the Medicine Bow and Sierra Madre Mountains, with the possibility, possible add-ons to fly over the border into Colorado's upper North Platte Basin. And then also there's a possibility to even extend aircraft tracks over to the Laramie Range if and when aircraft is available and if the weather conditions are suitable. So with that, I will take any questions. Yes.
Go ahead.
I have a question. What kind of, you're always talking about clouds. What are they? Cumulonimbus, or what kind of clouds are you?
Mr. Chairman, so the type of clouds that it really varies. And so we don't often get the puffy, big cumulonimbus clouds in the wintertime. A lot of them are a deep layer of thick stratus clouds. But depending on the time of the year, so in the fall, so just before the winter, and then in the spring, there can be quite a lot of convection. And so winter storms can include cumulonimbus type clouds also, but it's generally the thicker clouds that have a lot of moisture. Does that answer your
For
question?
the planes to fly through, is it hard for them airplanes to kind of know which direction they're going out through the clouds?
Mr. Chairman, so it's not difficult for these types of planes to fly through these types of clouds. The challenge is that, as most of us know, planes do not like to fly through icing conditions because it accumulates a layer of ice on the wing and on the plane, which is really dangerous. But in order to get the seating agent where it needs to be, these planes have to fly through icing conditions. And so the particular plane that I showed pictures of is the type of plane that can accumulate a certain level of ice, and then they have what are called boots, I think, to shake off that ice. And so they're a special plane. I think it's the King Air turbo prop type plane that can has the ability to fly through those types of conditions.
Were the ranching concerns?
Mr. Chairman, the ranching concerns, I believe there were two concerns. The first one was that the ranchers were concerned that there would be additional snowpack on their property. That might be a problem with their cattle, but it was determined that any additional snowpack would occur above 8,000 feet, and the ranchers were below 8,000 feet. And then I believe, and I have to check on this, I think there was another concern that an increase in runoff would positively increase the grazing, but it would cost them extra money if that were to happen.
I had one comment or question. What are these ground generators? What do they burn and how do they work?
Thank you for the question. So, Mr. Chairman, and I should have put a picture of these ground-based generators, but essentially it looks like there's a propane tank, and then there's a tank of seeding agent. So it contains silver iodide in a separate tank. And then it looks like a stack with a chimney at the very top. And it essentially burns the seeding agent out of the chimney and creates a plume. And then from that point on, the air can take that plume and hopefully take it up and over those mountains. Ground generators can be turned on manually or remote control from a computer and turned off that way as well.
Picture one, Larry.
Is the success ratio with airplanes or ground generators, is there a higher success ratio one over the other?
So that's a good question and a complicated question because it really depends on the terrain feature. So one thing about ground generators is that if you don't have the instability in the atmosphere to pull that plume up and over those mountains, and if the wind direction is not at the right angle, then the ground generator can emit that plume and it'll either just stay there, fall down, or go around that mountain. And so in that particular case, a ground-based generator would not be that great. In a case where you have a lot of instability and the weather conditions are correct and the wind direction is good, then that would be great. For aircraft, it seems as though there's more opportunity to seed because the aircraft can go where it needs to be. However, the aircraft should not go too low. So with a mountain barrier, you don't want to be able to fly too low. So the temperatures have to be cold enough aloft for that aircraft to get into that particular area to seed. So generally speaking, I would say aircraft is more successful because it's a mobile device that can carry the agent and where that agent needs to be, whereas ground-based generators may not be as successful because it's a point location, and there's a lot of other factors that would make a ground-based generator successful. To answer your question.
Thank you.
That was a roundabout answer. Apologize.
Questions? Oh, Harry.
Mr. Chairman, so as Julie indicated, in the final project closeout tomorrow, there's going to be some recommendations that we'd like you to consider. But and let me start by saying that on the Medbos and Sierra Madres, as Julie indicated, we started out thinking, let's duplicate the ground-based generator system that we had during the study, actually increasing the number of those generators. And we quickly ran into the issue of the Forest Service. The special use application that we submitted that they rejected, they started to cite concerns about wilderness areas and changing the climate over wilderness areas, and it just got so difficult and confusing that we ultimately threw up our hands. We did resubmit an application after I spoke to a deputy regional forester in Denver, and they then reconsidered and they accepted that application, but they're talking about an EIS as part of the NEPA compliance. And so we're thinking aircraft operations, which are more efficient, are a better way to go, and we avoid the whole NEPA compliance issue with the federal government. We fly by and we wave to them in their wilderness areas as we're seeding the clouds. The other thing that is really, I think, starting to come into focus with regards to this Southeast Wyoming program is that the aircraft is more versatile in terms of hitting locations. With ground-based generators, you set up the network, they're fixed in location, you're waiting for clouds that are moving over those. But when Colorado approached us, and they were initially talking ground-based generators, and we said, well, if we're running an aircraft program, we can extend those tracks. We'll have the aircraft in the sky, and we can extend those tracks. And the North Platte Basin doesn't go very far into Colorado, but there are some very high mountain ranges that are very suitable for this type of weather modification efforts. So in our conversations, we've been very clear that if they were to pursue the additional cost, and again, flight time, the silver iodide flares, that it works very well for a two-state operation going forward. The other thing that we're looking at is this aircraft will be based probably in Cheyenne, I believe was the discussions, simply because they need a full service airport. Cheyenne offers a kind of a central location. You can go airborne and you can be over the Medbos of Sierra Madres quite quickly. But not all of the storms are going to be suitable for seeding necessarily in the Medbos. And if you looked at the tracks and directions into the Laramie range, there is a good likelihood that there will be storms that impact the Laramie range that do not impact the Sierra Madre, or they impact it at a different time frame. And the big cost with an airborne program is you're leasing the aircraft and the crew for entire winter season. When there are no clouds to seed, that aircraft is sitting in the hangar. We're still paying to lease that. So they're still making money, but we're not making any additional snow. So it occurs to me, and in our discussions internally, that by basing an aircraft in Cheyenne, we can probably pick up certain storms in the Laramie range when we're not seeding the Medbos and Sierra Madres. And so I think it becomes a very effective program. And as Julie indicated, we have enough dollars available for one season. And so we're going to be asking you to support a recommendation to move forward with seeding for 1 year in the Med Bowes. And then you'll see next fall then a request for additional funding moving forward. So that's what we're thinking. And so be happy to discuss that with you this afternoon, or if you want to defer and think about it over the evening and talk about it tomorrow, we certainly can.
Chairman Little.
Mr. Lancaster.
If the airplane is not seating, can it fly over to Star Valley?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Lancaster, there is actually a seeding program ongoing in Star Valley country that's run by Idaho Power. We would be duplicating those efforts in that respect.
Yeah, look, we could see the clouds on the way. Take a few of us up and come on over. Yeah. We'll check for elk on the way.
All right. We'll get the Game and Fish to assist in paying for the
Fish
aircraft.
didn't hear that, did they?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Evans.
Harry, is my math right? I mean, it seems to me the biggest value to this in terms of water development, because we develop water projects. This just develops water. A little different situation, but it seems to me it's helpful during a drought where the sponsors we would normally help are short of water. So if a drought is getting 50% of the water equivalent on runoff that it normally would get, that hurts our sponsors, our customers. So maybe if this is adding 10% to that snow melt, then the drought's only 40% of normal instead of 50. Is that very, very basic math that makes sense in terms of trying to identify the best rationale for weather mod?
So, Mr. Chairman, it's a little more complicated than that, in that when this aircraft or when the seeding takes place is when you have storms moving across the mountain ranges. And in drought years, typically you do not have as many storms. And so there's a reduced opportunity to seed. And so what I would tell you is that a seeding program needs to work in conjunction with available storage in the system. And at least in the North Platte system, which is a basin that I would call fully appropriated in terms of the water demands. The state engineer would not agree with me because he wants to keep a little bit of an option open there. But we do have, so the way these systems work best is when you have storage available and you get wet years or average years, you can make more water or more runoff. And with storage, then you have the ability to capture that for certainly that same year or maybe years in advance. And so you're able to stretch that water supply out. But weather modification is not a drought buster because simply you do not have storms to seed during dry years. And that's the issue that you're faced with. But I think with regards to the North Platte Basin, we have the storage in place. It's generally federal reservoirs. There's about 2.7 million acre feet of storage in the basin. And we certainly can take advantage of wet years or average years to make sure those reservoirs are full so that they can carry you through a future drought year. And that's really how the weather modification works best. But certainly in drought years, when you do have storms and you can seed, you can expect that there would be an increase in snowfall. It's just that it's not going to be enough to get you to really say, oh, we can move from a drought year to a non-drought year by virtue of seeding operations. It's not that prolific.
What reservoirs are you talking about? Like
Pathfinder,
Pathfinder and Seminole?
Cordis, Alcova,
Glendo,
Glendo,
Guernsey.
I mean, you're not talking Rob Roy and Crystal and Granite, because those fill up pretty quick once we get a couple good years. You're
Yes,
talking about the larger reservoir.
Well, I mentioned the federal reservoirs, that's 2.7 million acre feet, but certainly Rob Roy would be a beneficiary of this seeding operation. Granite and Crystal are away from the Med Bow, so it would not necessarily be additional snowfall in the South Platte Basin. But ultimately then, as you know, Cheyenne brings water from the Med Bows over to Granite and Crystal.
Any questions? Okay.
Do we get a break?
Thanks. Yeah. How much do we have? How quick is the small water going to go?
About 15 minutes, Jody, or?
Depends on question, but it can be very short if that's what.
Oh, do we want to take a break? Okay, let's take a break then, real quick. Commissioner Evans has
The
lots
chairman
of
Still
questions.
not.
You can push the meeting through real fast.
I'll have to educate him on water.
Okay. Small water story map.
Mr. Chairman, Jody Pavlika is going to walk you through the latest addition to Story Map. And if you recall, what was it, a year ago, we had launched this effort dealing with reservoir projects that we have underway. And so Jody's been working with Chris Nicholson and the Words group to kind of get up to speed and get a small water project story map going as well. So just to provide more information to you and the public about some of the projects that we're working on. So Jody, I'll let you take it from there.
Option on the microphone here. So start by kind of giving a few summary highlights here. The projects that are included in this story map are from projects that were active from the summer of 2015 forward. So what's magic about that timeline is I took over this program in February of 2015, and the very first thing that I prioritized was to put these projects in a database. And so that included lat longs to the best extent possible and that type of information. So that was how this got started then, taking the projects that were active, meaning not necessarily that they were funded in 2015, but they were still in the drawer as being waiting on completion. So the dates on these, for those of you who've been around for a while, it may look a little higgledy-piggledy in the beginning. That's why they were still ongoing when I took over the program. Certainly, as an agency, we have done more projects than that, but that's sort of the genesis of this. So this tab 1 right here is tabs run across the top here. The number of tabs across the top will change. This is pretty neat technology depending upon the monitor you are running this on. So if you have a little skinny monitor, then you will get over to Lincoln County. If you have a big wide monitor, then you will have, you know, more tabs across the top. So don't be thrown by that. Let's see, this is an introduction, basic introduction to the program. And then there's a link back to the website here. These dots, you can zoom in wherever you like. And then the dots are clickable. When you click on it, it brings up, and this is consistent across the story map webpage. So when you click on the dot, it will bring up the primary project name, the sponsor of the project, the watershed study that it was included in, and then the sub-project name is a category that I included in the database because regularly sponsors will bundle these projects together. So we will have a pond and a well, or a couple of ponds, or, you know what I mean? They bundle these projects together for their own management purposes. So that's what the subcategory specifics refer to there. And then the description will look very familiar to those of you who have read the descriptions out of the recommendations, because that's where those descriptions came from. And then to the best extent possible, and we're going to show some of these later, we have before and after photos down at the bottom down here. We tried to capture photos that were of a good enough quality to serve up on the website. So we have, because there's a legislative requirement, we have before and after photos for all of our projects in order to receive final payment. But some of those have come in paper printouts or in a PDF or in a format that just was not digital of a sufficient quality to want to serve it up on the website. So just a little background for you there. You can see over here on the legend, the dots are color coded on this particular main tab here according to the district. So you can kind of see which districts are doing what. If you move over to the second tab, it'll zoom back out to the statewide view. And then this tab is unique among the other tabs in the fact that I didn't want to lose sight of just the number of applications that we get every year, what that looks like across the state. So you could take a look at what did 2015 look like, 2016, and so on. We do not have the 2018 up yet because you guys haven't seen 2018 yet. So we have all of that in the GIS, and it is ready to be shipped over to Words, and they will post it just as soon as the final approvals have been delivered by you guys in Select Water. Make sure I'm not missing any details here. Oh, and the same is true for these. You can click on this and it will tell you this particular project is a Thompson Robinson West project in Commerce County. It's in the Thunder Basin study. It was a well, and the completion date was to February 10th of 2016. And that completion date doesn't mean that's the date the well was completed necessarily. That's the date that they submit the final bill to payment for me, and I approve everything for final payment. So on this tab here, where we're looking at these things on a year-by-year basis, not all of these projects will necessarily have been completed. These are the applications that come in that are approved for funding. But if a project sponsor comes back to us and said, something terrible's happened, there's, we can no longer afford to complete this project, like, there's some flooding and the money they were going to put towards this, they have to go to fix other infrastructure, and we'd like to withdraw the project. There are projects in here that were withdrawn before they were able to be completed. So just in case you're trying to run those numbers in your head, the numbers here on project applications aren't necessarily going to line up with the ones in the other tabs. We talked about 2018. So then you'll see these other tabs here where we have district specific tabs, and it will zoom in for you to the specific district and then focus on their individual tabs or on their individual projects. As you see, it also brought up this other bar on the left hand side, and when you scroll down, it goes through some but not all of the projects. Now, that distinction is made by those ones that had a pretty good digital photograph in order for us to showcase the ones. Those are over here on the other side. And then you will also see that a lot of these, and they're not coming in this particular view extent, have numbers. You can go to here and you see those numbers will pop up next to the dots. So if you're interested, number 2 is here. That's Mayfield Cabin Spring. This is one of the photos that was available on file. There's, the specifics about that. And similarly, you could click on that and get more information. So found a couple of really good examples for you. If I can now, of course. The numbers disappeared there. So as I'm scrolling in and out, if the dots stack up on top of each other, the number may be under one of the other numbers, so it'll erase it. So if you're looking for something specifically and you don't see the particular number, zoom in a little bit and it'll pop up for you. So this project is the Cow Camp Spring. This is a pretty recent project. I think this was a 2016 or 17 project. It's in Lincoln County Conservation District in the Blacks Fork Watershed Study. It was a spring development. There's the description, spring development, pipeline, and then tanks, of course. And then part of the reason why I wanted to pick this one is because there's some really good imagery for the before and after photos. And while I don't think I can click on that and make that larger, you can see that there's the before shot here. Then you click that arrow and you can see the after shot where they've got the spring capture system here, and they've got it ready for use. Another good one for you guys in Natrona County. This one was the McClanahan project, well and pipeline project. It's showing up with the sub-project name as solar, but there was more to it than that. There was a pipeline, 15,000 feet of pipeline, 4 stock tanks, will provide water for livestock, wildlife. So there's your before, and then you click the little arrow, and then there's the after with the solar system. And the protection around it, of course, since you put one of those solar systems in, you want to make sure that that's well protected. And then for those ones that alphabetically fall off the edge here, you click that menu over there, and you can zoom into the ones that didn't have room to fit on the monitor. This one Apex project. So this looks like a lot of irrigation diversions across the state of Wyoming. We're all familiar with this shot here, and I realize that it's small. But it's the sort of stop log kind of hard to work design. That's the before we've all seen a bunch of times. And then you put through the small water program, and then you got a functional structure that works very well for everybody, and it is designed to last a really long time and make good use. And I know these guys in Sublette County do a really good job of partnering with the NRCS and the EQIP funding in particular. So they always provide us really good stuff. So that's the highlights. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has them.
Mr. Glick.
On your map, I mean, it looks really good, and I like how you hot linked the information to each point. Is there ways to change, like the shape files have topographic, highways, interstates, stuff like that, rivers, lakes, stuff like that. Is there ways to put that on there?
Yes, and I'm very quickly getting out of my depth here. I'm familiar with ArcGIS, the big program. This is a different sort of subset program which posts these things on the website. So you have infinite functionality almost in the big ArcMap program, but then you transition over to this StoryMap program, and it kind of limits what you can do for the web pages. So I know Rosemary with Words is the one who typically handles those questions. A lot of those changes can be made. It's not necessarily to the same level as you can with the big program, and maybe Chris can handle more specifics.
With this program, really, you only have, I believe, one option as an underlying background image. So you can either put terrain, or you can put aerial imagery, or words, but you only have really one option, fortunately. And so with this, in this case, we just went with the terrain. But if, depending on what folks are interested in, we could switch that out.
But I was just thinking, I like looking at a topographic map that has all of the, it's like a vector or whatever they call it, just one solid picture. I think that would, and personally, I think I'd like to see it that way instead.
Much.
Other questions for Jody? No other questions. Thanks. Good job. Harry.
So, Mr. Chairman, before we move on to the last item, which is location of the summer tour, I neglected to give one more update legislatively, and that is the agency's budget, which was submitted at about $8.3 million for the biennium. When we got in front of House appropriations, was it House? House appropriations, they cut our budget 4%, which is about a $327,000 or $28,000 cut. And I know the governor, I think he has signed the budget bill, and I haven't looked at vetoes, but I'm assuming that cut remains. So within the agency, doesn't affect the commission so much, but within the agency, we're going to be looking to have to cut those funds for the upcoming biennium. So I apologize that I was focused on bills and not the agency budget.
It's not your fault that they cut it. That's their fault.
I argued for it, but appropriate, and I in the conversation in front of appropriations was, I guess the question was, did this agency have to cut its budget in the last year or two as other general fund agencies had? And my answer was no, we are not a general fund agency. And then they said, well, to be fair, we're going to cut your budget. So, and I believe that's the final form of the budget that was then considered by the House and Senate.
Any other questions on the budget?
They took some money out of water development last year to run the state general fund or something, education. Did we get any of that back?
No, so the way that worked was that was the funding piece for the Board of Control in the state engineer's office. That budget was formally or previously funded with general fund dollars. When they scratched general fund and put water development account 1, they actually saved money in the general fund by inserting Water Development Commission funds. So that's how they accomplished that. And they, as I mentioned, that one bill to restore that funding to Water Development Account 1 failed. So.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Commissioner Glick.
Harry, I was going to ask you, like, I know you send out all of the materials, hard copies for the proposals and stuff. I mean, we could probably save some money by doing digital, you know, if you send it out to us digitally. That way we don't have all this paper either. I mean, I read all my stuff online anyway. I mean, so that might be a way for us to save some money right there.
So let me ask, do we receive all of those electronically? And so is that a possibility? Okay. And we would need to know then if there are other members that would prefer electronic submittals opposed to hard copy.
Either way.
I couldn't. Not unless.
Mark on it and scribble.
That's kind of what I feel. I think if they were sent that way, I'd still copy them. I have the ability to copy them, so.
I see one electronic, 2 electronics. David, 3. Okay. Sheridan?
Maybe ask everybody to, especially for like Karen and Nick aren't here, send out an email, ask them to respond, how they'd like them, and then you'll know.
Good idea.
That'd be better.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, that'll require some coordination with Words. They do all of our technical stuff for us, but I don't. Absolutely. That's the answer. So yes, that will be.
Well,
give
Katie
that man a
Katie
raise.
would give me step by step how to get into the computer to do it.
Please don't save
I'd
no
like
money.
to do it.
Yeah, that'll be an effort on their part, and they're great and very responsive to those things. So I appreciate that.
You watch the pennies, the dollars take care of themselves. Didn't somebody famous say that?
The penny saved is, yeah.
Oh, yeah, and it's not Victor, it was Raster, I think. You know?
Okay. Location of the summer tour. Harry.
Well, Mr. Chairman, under tab I of your notebook, you will see at least the last 20 or so years of where our summer tour has been. We are talking about August 15 through 17 this summer. And I will I'll give you the opinions of at least one senator, which I happen to agree with his suggestion to you, and that is we should go to Gillette. And the reason for that is we're about ready to finish or get very close to finishing a $217 million project. I'm not sure it should be, at least 2 of the wells should be operational by August. But you can then see the existing well field. We can travel up to some of the new well sites. And in fact, I would hope to include potentially being able to at least view the properties that have the private wells that have experienced the difficulties in the last year. So I think it's timely. As I look, we were in Gillette last in 2007, it looks like. So that was the suggestion of Senator Driscoll, and I certainly would endorse that, but ultimately it's your decision. Commissioner Suker, we have at least chatted about maybe getting up to the Pine Haven project as well. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I could reiterate on that, I'd like to see it come into Crook County too, being we're there. We're in Crook County. Sundance, I think, has a project going. That'd be a good visit if we could make time. Because I think even the Madison, once we look at the well field, you know, there's not a lot to see there. We could spend some time, I'm sure, but I think the tour, if the tour could continue through Sundance, maybe Pine Haven, I think it would be helpful too. Maybe even Hewlett. And I don't know where would be an appropriate place for, have you talked anything about motels where the stay would be, or is that, has that
Mr.
been
Chairman,
addressed?
yeah, Mr. Chairman, we've not made any arrangements or even contacts into motels. My suggestion, or Senator Driscoll's suggestion of Gillette, I think there's better motel availability certainly in Gillette, but we could look at changing that location. But if you were to start in Gillette and move down the pipeline or up the pipeline to the well field, and then from there you can go Pine Haven or Sundance, then it gets to be a longer day. But certainly, and then kind of a return effort repeating that. And then I think meeting facilities, well, I've certainly conducted meetings in Hewlett and even Sundance. So I think there's opportunities, but because there'll be a business meeting day and work session for that matter. So, but again, if that's the direction to go there, then we can start to look at those arrangements.
Sure. I think
Mr. Evans.
consider staying in Pine Haven, maybe on a houseboat.
Well, I will commit to feed you an evening dinner or that evening.
There we go.
Can't beat a deal like that. Ride the grub line.
On fire and hot dog, right?
And beer.
Any other suggestions, concurrences?
Mr. Chairman,
Comments?
I was just told by our local motorcycle club guy that Sturgis is over on the 12th. So you could, if you want to come early and bring your motorcycle, or. But we will be missing that, but at least we'll probably be crossing some of that traffic. We don't want to be there when Sturgis is running, but.
Still be hung over.
There'll still be some spillover.
Yeah. There'll be the stragglers.
Okay, well, with that, if there's nothing else, I guess, Harry?
So we're talking Gillette then and build a tour from there.
It's
Okay.
you do what you
Haven't heard any other ideas, so it sounds good.
So, Mr. Chairman, then on a related note, your June meeting is now scheduled June 14th and 15th for Cheyenne, traditionally in Cheyenne. And looking around, Senator Hicks is not in the audience. He may be in the audience tomorrow. But discussions at the legislature last week were on interim topics. And the various committees brought forth interim topics. Those are all forwarded on to the Management Council, and Management Council then will set those agendas, and then they have one or two meetings that those standing committees or the joint committees will handle. Senator Hicks has proposed as an interim topic Colorado River issues, and is suggesting a full day to look at Colorado River issues, which could include weather modification, demand management program, any number of topics. And he suggested a full day session in doing that. And he wanted to have that in the basin. And he is suggesting a joint meeting between Select Water and Joint Ag, and that the commission is also invited to that. Now, they then started talking calendars because they have to work that in. Some members of that larger legislative group have other committee assignments. And that's always a struggle to find dates where you can get as many legislators there. It appears that June 14th is a potential date for that joint or interim topic meeting. And so I mentioned that to you because if that's the case, I would strongly suggest that maybe we have the June meeting in the basin so that our work session may ultimately be Colorado River issues, which I think would be of interest to everybody. And then we would follow that up with a one-day meeting for business. And there will be some contract business. The planning projects will be there. So I guess at this point, we're waiting for the management council to decide and then to work out agendas. But I think if we can have joint ag and select water and the commission jointly meeting for that work session day, I think that's really a very good and appropriate topic for, and I would want to see the commission involved certainly in those discussions going forward. So stay tuned. We may try to move that June meeting with your approval and they were talking Pinedale, Big Piney area opposed to Rock Springs, Green River. But this is all tentative at this point in time, and we'll certainly keep you posted. And unless you say you don't want to meet jointly with them.
Commissioner Geis?
Well, it'd be a 3-day if you're going to make the 14th the full work, and then we'd have to go over the next. It wouldn't be an afternoon meeting on the 14th then.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. What I think I would try to do is that we would not have our own individual work session. We would just combine that with joint ag and select water and have it on the Colorado River. And then the next day follow that up with a business meeting.
That's a lot of legislators, a lot of people to bring in.
Again, it's tentative at this point in time, but it sounded like there was at least some real interest in having just that one-day Colorado River issue meeting.
The June meeting would be over in that area rather than here in Cheyenne.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
We understand what we're doing.
Okay.
How come we don't have excuse me.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No worries.
Why don't we have like a short workshop and then do the Colorado River so that we can sit down and talk about our own issues on that first day, and then we do the Colorado River and then our business on the last day.
Mr. Chairman, we could look at that. The question is whether we'll have work session items. So you see today we had about a 3-hour meeting or so. But if we could handle those also on the if the business day meeting, we might try to do that. Trying to, not trying to expand it to a 3-day meeting, but maybe try to keep it condensed to a 2-day meeting if we can.
Because I think once we get in there and start meeting with everybody, we're gonna not be able to even talk about our own issues. Just a suggestion.
And Mr. Chairman, this meeting, the June meeting, is traditionally a joint meeting with Select Water. So, and because there's contracts, we'll be asking them to consider and recommend those contracts as well.
We'll have almost, instead of 12 or 14 legislators, you're going to have around 20 legislators there, because all of them don't belong on either select water or ag.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Geis, that is correct.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Oh, I'm done.
Okay, anything else, Harry, from you?
Mr. Chairman, I think adjourn the meeting. And then if I could just have 2 minutes of your time, I've got a personal item I wanted to discuss with you. So
adjourned.